Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. This is the second edition of our recently created the Human Rights Forum. CGS Minnesota wants to thank our co-sponsor Global Minnesota. Visit its webpage at globalminnesota.org. If your organization wants to partner with the CGS for future events, please contact us at cgsmn.contact@gmail.com. I will drop this email in the chat in a few moments. I will put this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website in the past events tab. Please keep your microphones muted. Audience is welcome to ask questions and make comments after our speaker finishes her presentation. On behalf of CGS Minnesota, I want to welcome everybody and our guest speaker, LaToya Burrell. She is the executive director of the Anderson Foundation, where she leads and manages the activity of the foundation. She has a Juris Doctor degree from Southern University Law Center and a Master's of Business Administration from Metropolitan State University. She is a licensed attorney in the state of Minnesota and Louisiana, and a published author recently writing a book on harmonious racial reconciliation entitled Be Bold, How to Prepare Your Heart and Mind for Racial Conciliation. Ladies and gentlemen, with you, LaToya Burrell. Welcome, LaToya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the warm introduction and the invitation to share space with you all on this beautiful June afternoon. I do have some slides that I'm going to use to project, but this is a smaller group and my preference is not to just have questions at the end. I want this to be engaging and interactive. So feel free to interrupt me at any point with any questions that you might have. And also because of the questions that I initially want to go through with you all, I'm going to wait and not project the slides initially because I would rather see you all spaces as opposed to have the PowerPoint dominate our Zoom screens. So as stated, that was a very warm introduction about me. I really appreciate it. But if I had to give any requests for this afternoon, let's say we're going to be together for the next 50 minutes or so, I think the only request that I would have is that you all, I know this is being recorded. I would request, however, though, that despite the recording, that you be open, that you be honest, and that you be respectful. I know in this space, there are a lot of uncomfortable conversations that take place, and there's been a shift in the language being called a brave space. You typically will hear someone say, well, this is a safe space, and then the transition is going into this is a brave space. Personally, I still like to say this is a brave and safe space because unfortunately, it's not easy to be brave in a space if you don't feel safe in it. So I want to just go ahead and put that out there up front. The second thing I want to do is the topic that I was asked to speak on is a very broad topic, but I'm going to pull it in and tell you just a few nuggets of what I believe to be the crucial solution to the problem, and that's racism in the United States. First and foremost, recognizing the fact that racism is not only a problem in the United States, but also recognizing that we can choose to continue to perpetuate the problem or choose to be a part of the solution. And my philosophy is always to choose to see the glass as half full and figure out, despite things out of my control, something that was created well before our time and likely generations before us time, it's something that I choose to be a solution towards. So this presentation will be geared more towards solution orientation as opposed to digging into the depth of the history, the debates. I know there are some debates on if race is even, I know we're talking about racism, but if race is even real. There are some debates about race being a social construct and we being a part of the human race. But it's undeniable that I always say, I will agree that race is a social construct, but it is indeed a real construct. And from race, the division has come the feeling of racism. So I know in this space, a lot of people will say, well, I feel uncomfortable in this space. I don't like talking about the topic. And it may be for different reasons. I've heard some people say, I'm uncomfortable because I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend anyone, or I don't feel like I know enough, so I'm quiet. And so I will say you are in good company if that's how you feel, but we have the authority to say, you know what, we're not going to let uncomfort or discomfort dominate the space. We're going to choose to say, let's go ahead and call it out and say, yeah, there may be a little discomfort, but there's more harm in me sitting in my silence than me choosing to lean into that discomfort. And oftentimes the growth comes in the discomfort. So I would like to know who's here tonight. So I was at a baseball game. I know that feeling. Every night something with the kids. In fact, my husband, I was off camera until 5:58. My husband walked in with the oldest son from karate, and I was still with the little one. So I get it. But for those who are not quite multitasking right now, if you can, I would love to know who's here. And I want you to tell me 3 words if you can. And you can do that in the chat. We can use the chat feature. And I welcome the opportunity for anyone who is comfortable to come off of mute and share. But I just want to give you guys a few seconds to reflect on 3 words. So if I ask you, what are 3 words that you would say define or represent who you are? What would those 3 words be? So I'll pause for a few seconds.
Curiosity, curiosity, curiosity.
I love that, Lynn. Thank you. So Lynn said her words are curiosity across the board. I love that. Anybody else? And usually I would say 3 words that describe who you are or why you're here. So since Lynn told us the curiosity, I think that may be a little bit of the who she is and why she's here. So I will say that as well. If you want to expound with maybe not just the 3 words of who you are. And I see they're coming in. Thank you so much. Passionate, proactive educator. Thank you, Pamela. Learning, growing, playing. I love that. Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else want to share your 3 words? You can do it in the chat, or you can feel free to come off of mute.
I'll share my 3. Would be concerned, curiosity, and responsibility.
Okay, I love that.
I'll share mine. It's Julie, artist, activist, and teacher.
Okay. All right. So I love those words that have come in. I think that one thing I will ask you to do is keep those words handy. So if you wrote them in the chat, they'll be there reflected for you. But if you didn't, I would ask you to just hang on to those words because we'll come back to those words. So I will share with you what my 3 words are. And I would say that my 3 words are bold, harmonious, and advocate. And if we had met maybe 18 months ago, if you would have asked me to tell you some words to describe myself, I would have probably just used my Gallup strengths. Now it's 5 Gallup strengths, and one of them is learner, one is achiever, one is harmony. I probably would have just stuck with 3 of those Gallup strengths. But my words are, again, bold, harmonious, and advocate. And I think it's important that when we consider the work, and I say the work, I know some of you may say, well, it's not about the work for me, it's really about the education piece. So the topic of this presentation was about racism in the United States. I think that in having that discussion, it can't take place without you being willing to have some introspection. So a lot of the discussion around racism, as I stated a few minutes ago, I think that is more important for us we can talk about what it is and come to a common agreement easily on what racism is. We can look at some stats, some problems that persist and exist around it. But then my question would always be, and what are we going to do? What's the solution? Are we going to be a part of the solution, or are we going to just sit and allow the problems to dominate the same way that discomfort could dominate? So I'm going to share a little bit about just my background and my call to action around the space of racism. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about a few solutions in the space that I believe are imperative. So, the words I choose to allow to identify myself, unfortunately, is not always what you see. So we have layers of who we are. Personality is at the core, but people often will see what they visually can see, right? So you might see Black, you might see woman, you may presume an age. If we were in person and you saw a ring on my finger, you can presume marital status, but that doesn't tell you if I have children. It doesn't tell you my profession, my background, ethnicity, sexual preference. None of those things are told to you by just looking at me. But essentially, my call to action was last summer when George Floyd was murdered right here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I work and live. And, you know, I say to people, this by far wasn't the first time I've had racial experiences in my life, but this time it was just different for me. And I just had this sense of there needs to be something done, and I feel that it's my job to do something. And so I've just been on a mission ever since then. And I think one of the biggest pieces of no understanding that I feel that that's my call to action is I've had some people who said to me, can you tell me a few steps of what I can do? And I'll say, and that was a part of my trigger too. Being here in Minneapolis, continue to get calls from colleagues, classmates, childhood friends, family members, all across the world, frankly, that I was here, first checking in on me and then asking me, how can I help? I found myself, we can listen, we can learn, and we can be bold. Kathy, I'm sorry, I'm saying Kathy, that's not your proper name, I'm sorry. If I break up, can you let me know? Because I just got a message that I'm having an unstable internet connection.
You
And
broke
if
up
that
just a
happens, I
little.
will transition devices. So please let me.
You broke up a little for a moment.
You said
We
Okay,
just missed
can you
a
all hear me
couple
now?
words, LaToya, don't worry, we
Can you
didn't
all hear
miss everything you said.
Okay, so if
And when that happens, we
if
can
that
turn
happens
off
again,
our video, that might help also, right?
and I'm ready to switch to a device too. So if that happens, just let me know. All right, so I was just explaining the response that I had. And so what I get from people is, what can I do? Can you tell me just what books I can read? What events can I attend? And I always say to people, it's not a blueprint. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a 10-step process. It's definitely a journey. And the thing about that journey is we all start the journey at different points. So for me, it's important for me to know when my journey began. You know, I know that I say it's a marathon, and with this marathon, there's different mile markers. We're all going to have different stop points, different start points, and that's okay. So it's important for you to figure out, why does this work? Why does this topic matter to you? As well as what led you to this space, right? So I'm going to actually share the screen now, because I do want to ask you all a question. And then as I'm sharing the screen, I want you guys to think about this question. When is the first time you were made aware of race, racism, your race, different races? If you guys can just think about that. You can. I'm going to stop share actually. I'm going to stop and reshare. But as you all are thinking about that, feel free to share in the chat, come off of mute. I'm just curious to hear some of your stories. If you can remember, when is the first time you were made aware that there were different races? The fact that, Fran.
Back in the 50s, in elementary school in New Jersey, we had one Black fella in the class, and we had a dance performance, and he was my partner. And my grandfather, who lived with us, was outraged. I didn't quite get it, but that was the first time I became aware that I shouldn't have been partnered off with him in some manner.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that.
South.
Dick, the first time I remember would be in the 1940s when I was in early school years, Little Black Sambo, a book. And I don't know why I remember it, but I remember it quite vividly.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else wants to share?
When I was a child, I remember hearing descriptive words used in reference to people, and I didn't know what the words meant.
Okay.
When I was a child, perhaps third grade, I had two friends. One was white and one was black. And they were closer to each other than to me, but still. And then one time I was in the house of one of them, and the mother was very mad, and she said to me, you know, bad things about the black girl, that it was not right to mingle, and if I wouldn't agree with her. I was just a child. I didn't even know what she was talking about, because they were just friends, and why was not right. So for me, it was, I think, the first time that I actually had, I learned that there was something happening, but I didn't, I had to go back home and tell my mom to figure out what was happening.
Okay. All right, I understand. All right, let me check the chat. If anyone else wants to share, thank you all for everyone who has shared. I see as an elementary student in Wisconsin, I was called, yeah, it doesn't even feel comfortable to repeat it, even though it's written there. The just not pleasant things that maybe were said to you, and you didn't know what it meant. Yeah, and you were told to ignore it. So thank you so much for sharing. Do you all see the trend from the responses?
Yeah.
The trend of how early it starts. I can tell you my first time, and actually I don't think it was the first time, but it was the memorable time. My first time being called the N-word, I was in kindergarten. And you know, I often share, if I would share the story with you that I was called to the principal office in kindergarten, and my mom was called. You may think she's a bad kid. What did this kid do? But it was because the little boy called me that. And when I said, you know, don't tell me that, basically get away from me, he got in my face and he said it again and again and again, and I hit him. And so we got sent to the principal's office, and I'll never forget my mom coming and me telling her what happened. And for the first time, I knew it was different, because my mom is the type of mom that, my opinion is, if I was in trouble at school, she was not hearing me out. She was going to side with the authority, with the teachers. But just to see, once I said to her what happened, her transition into, so what are we going to do about this? And affirming to me that it was okay and that I wasn't wrong, was the first time that I can remember feeling like there's something here. So thanks so much for sharing that. And again, a lot of buzz right now is around the whole discussion of becoming an anti-racist. And with racism comes the whole discussion of whether or not you have biases against people solely because of their differences, more specifically, different races or different ethnicities, different identifiers, I should say. And so there's been this whole discussion about, it's not enough for you to say, I'm not racist. Because I'm not racist means I'm not racist, and that's just that. But it's been, instead of you just dismissing it with what I'm not, how about you say what you are, and giving you the opportunity to say, you know, I'm not racist. In fact, I am an anti-racist, and these are the things that I've done boldly to be anti-racist. So what I have shared right now on the screen is depiction that has circulated around a lot in the last year or so. And it gives you ideas of things that you can do around this space. So again, it's a journey. We're all at different stages, but I like that this depiction starts off by saying, here are different zones you might be in. The fear zone. So that may be that I'm uncomfortable. It says here, I deny that it's a problem. I may say that race is a social construct, and as such, racism doesn't exist. I avoid hard questions. I'm not going to read everything that's here. But the I strive to be comfortable means I'm uncomfortable and I don't like it. And then you can move into the learning zone. I often say to people, it's okay for you to kind of be in more than one zone as well. I feel like at times you can be in all three of the zones. You can say there's a fear around the unknown, yet I'm constantly trying to learn and grow. So you might find yourself identifying as being fitting in any of these zones. My challenge to you would be, wherever you are, make sure that that lines up with where you want to be. And I say people have the right to have decisions and opinions. So if someone says, this is just not a discussion that I choose to have, it's not even about discomfort or uncomfort, I don't think is a problem and I don't want to have the discussion, they're entitled to that. But I say, if you tell me I really want to be, someone said advocate, if you say I want to be an ally, I want to be an anti-racist, and right now I find myself in the fear zone, I would challenge you to say there are things you can do to move forward in this space. The next slide, we already talked about your first experience around race and racism. Now, I do want to share this video, and I will tell you, it's a maybe 4-minute video. It's a cartoon depiction, and I've seen it several times. And as much as I can say it's not perfect, I always have this sense of, what can I do after I watch this video? So what I want you all to do is, I'm going to play this video. I want you to think about what you agree with and what you don't, because we're human, right? And then that's the discussion I want to have after I play this video. Right. so much for taking the time to watch that video. I don't know why for me it always feels a lot longer than 4 minutes, but it's 4 minutes. I would love to just hear your thoughts about the video. Welcome any maybe questions or dialogue about the video. And then I'll share last.
Well, I'll just share that I've seen videos with real people lined up for a, walk across a field or something like that. And, take one step forward if you haven't had this problem. And I mean, then it becomes a little more nuanced because white people who are poor may not be taking steps, but then it becomes very clear that race really, holds back many, many steps. This was okay, but I felt like it didn't really communicate the message really the same. And it was pretty black white. I mean, literally black white, and that as if all of the white people sailed through life. And I think there'll be some resistance from parts of white audiences to that part of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. Yes, Patrick.
Hi. Thank you for being here tonight. And I would like to just step back for a minute and address the question about the first time that I was aware of racism. It was also in the early 1950s. I was 5 years old and I was driving with my Aunt Ruth, and someone cut her off in traffic and she got very angry and she yelled out, "The Jews, the niggers, and the hillbillies." And I had no reference of what those words meant because I grew up in a very isolated white Catholic middle-class neighborhood. So I had no idea what's a Jew, what's a nigger, what's a hillbilly. I didn't know. I continued to grow and unfortunately practiced some racist behaviors in my life. But now that I'm 73 years old, when I hear a white person especially say, "Oh, I'm not a racist," there's a little red flag that goes up when I hear that language, because I think it is often defensive language. So I am at the point in my life that I own my racism. I am a racist. I own that. I name it. The difference is I am not a practicing racist. I'm a recovering racist. And I think it's just, for me, it's just important to say, I'm not going to, I'm not a racist. It's like, no, I am a racist and I own it. And I'm comfortable explaining what that means. So I just wanted to share that thought with you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else want to give a little insight or reflection from the video?
I would like to say, I think the video demonstrates the situation of African Americans that I was aware of starting back when I was in the late 40s, early 50s. I'm 77 years old, and I grew up in a primarily, I think I would call it a white upper middle class neighborhood. There were no other, there was a couple of Spanish families, but there were no African American families in that neighborhood. And if I drove to San Francisco, which was done very often, I would pass a town that was primarily African American and very poor. And the explanation I got was that, quote unquote, they were ex-slaves and they don't have the education. And that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. So I'll say this, and again, I want us to continue to have a dialogue. The thing that I do, the thing that I don't like about the video, I'll start with what I don't like. I don't like the end part, because I think you lose people there. And it's important to me to be careful with language. I am an advocate. I don't like white privilege. I don't like white fragility. I don't like white supremacy. I don't like using words like that, because I know that unless I'm defining what it means and what it does not mean, there's some people who are going to get caught up on well, what do you mean privilege? I've worked hard for everything that I have, as opposed to understanding that in the context it's supposed to mean a privilege against the things that were listed in the video, right? I give the example of Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. I had read the book and I didn't think it was a bad book. And when my book was almost out, I was waiting for my release date, I was having nervous jitters, like at this point, what if my book's not well received? I found myself like reading reviews in depth of books. And so Robin DiAngelo, other people who wrote books on maybe racism, racial reconciliation, her book, White Fragility, I particularly wanted to read the 1-star reviews. And it was very clear to me quickly that the 1-star reviews hadn't read her book. And I think that they got caught up with the title because of the comments that would come with White Fragility. And it sounded to me like they maybe read the back of the book and the title. And so, you know, that just kind of confirms for me, I don't like the idea of, this is not about making anyone feel like they're to blame. I don't feel like we're going to have progress in that way. But the one thing I do like about this video is, though, I've been asked by people, I keep hearing the topic systemic racism. I don't believe that that exists. Can you help me understand? Mm-hmm. And so for me, the video, even though it doesn't go in depth on these topics, I say, if you want topics that you can go deeper on, there are the topics, right? I also get the question of, why do we make, and I see your hand, Pamela. So I get the question of, why do we focus on Black and white? There are so many other races. And I think that that's important. And I point out to people, unfortunately, we're talking about in America, and it's not, you know, we can talk about genocide. We can talk about other things that happen that impacts us. And we are indeed a melting pot here in America. So my thing is, if we're going to talk about this, it's too broad of a topic for us to say, let's talk about racism. We have to say specifically what group we're talking about, because if not, other groups will feel that they're not, maybe, you know, if Black issues dominate because of the sheer history, it may make someone who's Asian or of another, you know, nationality or ethnicity feel that their issues are suppressed. And for cultural reasons, they may not speak up. So I always say a best practice is to separate it and say specifically, we're talking about racism as it impacts Black America, or as it impacts Asian Americans. So I'll continue, but yes, Pam.
I wanted to say that the first 10 years of my life, I was in a rural area of South Carolina. Parents grew up in the Depression, World War II, textile mill workers. My extended family were farmers and not wealthy people. My first experiences with Black people were, my parents were shift workers in a textile mill, and I had a Black caregiver, and there were farm workers who lived in shacks, houses around that were field workers in the area where I lived. My grandmother was the cook in the rural school and had one wonderful Black lady who was her helper in the kitchen. We then moved to Pensacola, Florida, that was the big city. And in my high school years, in a school of more than 2,000, we were integrated for the first time with 7 Black students that I don't remember ever seeing. But the conversations at the time when in the 1960s in high school, when the civil rights sit-ins and those things were going in, you heard a lot of conversations. I was the first to go to college on scholarship. My parents, blue-collar workers, could not have afforded to send me. And I went to Florida State University, and it was my first exposure to, I was brought up Southern Baptist, and we were in church. Your lives revolved around church, family, church, work, and school, community spirit kind of attitude. And I don't remember my parents having ugly comments at all about racial issues, but there were tones of voices and questions about Catholics and Jewish people and relatives who had intermarried into other faiths and religions. And when I started teaching school in January of 1970, we were integrated under court order here in Pensacola, Florida, in my school district. And I was in culture shock over the children that had not had the support of love and family support. And I was in culture shock and almost quit teaching my first month or so because of my idealism being shattered and feeling I was not prepared to deal with these children who had grown up in poverty. I never felt poor with the family support that I had. But over my 73 years now, I just attended last week in a wonderful philanthropist support of Civicon and Community Conversations, a speaker on equity, inclusion, and intrinsic inclusion. It was on diversity, equity, and intrinsic inclusion. And his comment was, it is a condition of human nature. As human beings, we are all biased.
Yes, we are.
And the way that we are socialized and brought up, we need to acknowledge that we all have biases as the first step to learning and overcoming our fears about our differences. But to know that it's one world, one heart, and that if we're ever going to promote the unity of humanity, we have to acknowledge our human bias and moving forward.
Well, thank you so much. And I assure you all, I did not plant Pamela in the audience. She did not know that the next slide was going to ask you, do you have biases? And I did not plant Patrick either. But I will say this, I like the fact that, you acknowledge the fact that we have biases, and the quicker that we acknowledge that we have them, the quicker we can do the work to make them move from the biases, move from the unconscious to the conscious, or the subconscious to the conscious, right? So I always say we're human. And so even when my book first came out, I remember putting it out there that I had a book coming out, and I'll just transparently say it was Black friends, family members who were like, I'm gonna buy this book for all of my white friends and all of my white coworkers. And I was like, well, make sure you get yourself a copy too, because the reconciliation, the unity, it requires work on both parts. The biases are inherent and they exist on both parts. And I've said, I know, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but the history, if I'm talking to someone who's a Black person who's maybe 80, 70, and they live through the civil rights era, or they live through segregation and desegregating schools and things like that, their experiences are not the same as maybe what my experience or even my kids' experiences might be. So there may be this, the same way you might have, I've heard people say the discussions that take place at family tables. I've heard a lot of people who will say, I'm ashamed, my family members are racist. These are the discussions that happen at our holiday tables. And my thing is, it's not just at white tables. It's not just at Black tables. There are racial discussions and stereotypes and biases that are perpetuated at everybody's holiday tables. I've been in settings where I've heard Black people say white folks, and they'll make references to, kind of bundle in and lump together all white people. And for me, I'm like, I don't want to be lumped in and clumped in as all Black people. So, I try to not do that. But the whole idea is the look at, do we have biases? The reality is we all do. The question is, how do we do the work to make sure that it doesn't show up in a hurtful or harmful way? I give the example of, I remember when I first started practicing law, and I maybe had been practicing law for 3 or 4 years at this point. And every time I would show up to something court related, I would get asked, are you the paralegal? Are you a secretary? Are you the court reporter? It was never the lawyer. Now, of course, I could say maybe I looked young, maybe it was my gender, maybe it was my race. I don't know, but for whatever reason, there was a bias and association that placed me with not being the lawyer, right? So biases are natural, we're human. The question is, how do we work on those? On this next slide, I have this wheel. You may have seen this wheel or something like it. There's the iceberg culture examples, and I like to point out this wheel, and I saw you lean in, Patrick, so let me see if I can make it bigger. Did it get bigger? I like this wheel because the wheel points out different things that make us different. Personalities at the center, the core, but you can see the green level. It has race, age, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, and ethnicity. And I'm using this wheel on purpose. It's to point out the fact that we have differences, right? And you can have biases against a person for any one of these differences. You might have someone who will say they have, when we talk about the different generations, I've heard inappropriate comments made about millennials. I've heard inappropriate comments made about baby boomers. I've heard inappropriate comments made about different races, different genders, sexual preferences and orientations, educational background. I've heard stereotypes and biases about where a person is from, whether it's a different state or a different country. And typically what happens is the focus is put on, I like to say, if we're talking about just specifically here in the United States, you see a lot of focus being put on race. And then, you know, sexual orientation, preference, maybe somewhat, and then the gender as well. But this is the beauty of it. And I say to people, whether or not you feel that you are racist or not, you have biases against people, against differences. We just human beings, and that's what we do. And I like to look at it as not a negative thing, but your preferences that you have. And any work that you do in the space of paying attention to your biases, your implicit biases, makes you aware, and that impacts everything on this wheel. So I might admit that I have biases against people of a different age group or people of a different race, but I didn't realize I had biases against people who had different income brackets or different marital statuses. But the work that I do to bring the biases to the forefront on the topics that I'm aware of will also then impact positively the work in the other spaces that I may not be aware of. There's the Harvard Implicit Association testing. I'll stop the share for a second. The Harvard Implicit Association testing, known as the IAT, it's a website. A lot of people are knowing about it now, which I think is great that the word is getting out. It's a free website and it allows you to go to it, and it's private, it's quick. It allows you to just go through and do a series of tests. I call it gamification, and it tells you if you have a bias against people for a certain reason. So it may be race, it may be gender, it may be certain disabilities. It has like people who are overweight, people who are short, people who are tall, different religions. So I would encourage you to take some time if you've not seen. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat. I would encourage you to just take some time and spend some time with that website if you are interested in going deeper in that space. I will do one more thing. I want to play this video. I'll share my screen again. And again, I know that I like to point out, I don't want you to think, well, I thought this was about race. Definitely for me, we hear a lot of talking right now about intersectionality, right? And people talk about how there can be intersections of the things that make you different, or different prongs of diversity. So let's see. I don't have myself in the right mode. There we go. So I'm gonna play this short video and then I'll wrap up for us to do some more Q&A and discussion time.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Just don't trust
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
This is a man's job.
She's clearly not educated.
Really not. Does she even speak English?
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume. Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes, seeing people for who they really are. People like you with unlimited potential. We all have blind spots. Once you accept that you have them, you can choose to do something about it. It's time to check your blind spots and focus on what's possible.
Okay. So I'm gonna stop the share one more time. And again, if you guys have any questions or reflections from that video, please feel free to share them at this time. I think the biggest takeaway for me is the importance of us paying attention to our blind spots, our unconscious bias. And if we're talking about racism in America, we can focus on what in fact the impact of racism is. We can discuss whether or not we believe that racism is still a thing. I know a lot of people who said, well, we had a Black president, right? So we're post-racial, or we have a Black vice president, aren't we post-racial? And I'm just like, that is wishful thinking, but we're not quite there. And the solution is, I am not naive to think that we're just going to wake up tomorrow and be post-racial. I think that it's going to be a process, and it's going to take us intentionally putting forth the effort one by one. And so for me, the response to that is, it has to be the introspective piece. It has to be you reflecting within, and then you choosing to speak about it and share within your space. I always say I believe myself to be optimistic. I'm glass half full. Do I think that racism will be a thing of the past in my lifetime? No. In my children's lifetime? Nope. My grandkids? No, I don't. But what I do think is going to happen is we're going to make progress. I do think that eventually it will not be it will be the person who's choosing to still live in that state of being a racist, being a practicing racist, if you will. They will be the minority. They will be the ones who are uncomfortable in this space, and it won't be the ones who want a solution and want to change. So that's what I truly believe. My recommendation is, I often say, why go at it alone? Get you a group of people, I call it a growth group, who you can just go through this process with. And it can be any process. It doesn't have to be specifically racism. It can be, let's address our biases or our unconscious biases. So let's do the work together. Let's get books to read together and discuss together. Let's watch videos together. Let's do different things together and have that safe space to be able to unpackage what we've done. We only have 7 minutes left, but what I want to do is, in the last 7 minutes, I want to, and some of you may have heard of something like this before, and I know, for example, Nancy gave the example of, it's called a privilege walk, Nancy, when you talked about the people lining up and they'll ask you questions, and if something applies to you, you should step forward. So that's called the privilege walk, and it was, the different versions of it was inspired by the unpacking the knapsack is what it was called. So exercise. So it'll ask you things like, I'll give them not so common examples, or can you find Band-Aids, like the nude Band-Aids in your color? Can you find, if you're a woman, can you find pantyhose in your skin color? Questions about, have you ever had a teacher who looks like you? Or do you have physicians, any doctors or physicians that look like you? Do you have someone in your family who's of a different race? Questions like that, but it gets a little bit deeper. It may be you were raised in the house you grew up in, your family owned it. Or were you raised in a household by both parents? And I'm aware, Nancy, like you said, my experience and my upbringing doesn't even look like my kids. So my kids can do that privilege walk exercise, and they are going to be moving up the line just because of the different environment that they're in, as opposed to maybe the one that my husband or myself was raised in. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to just put on the screen I know I'm going back and forth with sharing and not, because I like to be able to see you all's faces. I'm going to share this again, and I'm going to, wait, I think I'm sharing the wrong document with you guys. This is informal. It's the PowerPoint that I want to share. I think I inadvertently closed my PowerPoint, so that's okay. The document that I wanted to share, I'll tell you what it was as I'm opening it back up. It's known as I've heard it called many things, but one of the things I've heard it called is Color Your World. And the Color Your World exercise asks you a series of questions. There it is. And what I say about the Color Your World exercise is, I would challenge you to not just look at the Color Your World exercise and say, yeah, that's where I am, but look at it with the lens of, but where do I want to be, or where can I be conscious in having a change in this space? So on the screen, you'll see there's a question like, who was the last guest that you invited to your house for dinner? And you're thinking specifically about the person's race. I know this is a weird question. Yeah, we're just coming out of the pandemic. So some people might say, I haven't had anybody over to dinner, but it's too long ago to think back to. Who was the last person you went out with socially? But then it asks you about your doctor, your dentist, the people you work with, coworkers, closest friends, spiritual leader, if you're a person of faith, your favorite actor, actress, singer. And the whole idea is for you to think about, is that this list? And I've seen the list be longer. I just put a few examples. When you look at it overwhelmingly and everything is the same as your race. So it wouldn't be that everything's white. Even I can be a minority here in America. And even when I read this, my list can be Black. And for me, but I don't want it to be that way. I want my list to represent the diversity that I know we represent as a world. So I would encourage you guys to just think through that and think about ways that you can be intentional. Now, I'm not suggesting that you get that token friend of another race, that token friend of another gender, but you just be intentional about how you operate and move in this space. Are there any comments or questions?
LaToya, I'm really intrigued by what your book is about. So could you give us a 2-minute blurb about what it's about? And I'm going to go get it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nancy. Yes. So my book is called Be Bold, How to Prepare Your Heart and Mind for Racial Reconciliation. And the book was inspired after George Floyd was killed, living and working here in Minneapolis. And like I said, the comments and questions I would get, and I kept finding myself having these discussions over and over, saying you can examine yourself, you can listen, you can learn, you can be bold. So in the book, I break it up into 4 parts. I can tell you the book is very personal. So I say to people, I'm personal in the book. I'll give you one example. Someone said, your book has experiences, Black experiences. And I said, because I'm a Black woman, like I can't speak to like any other, I can't speak about an Asian experience, right? I can read books to learn about it, but I can't write in first person about it. So the examine yourself section, I go through just how I have gone deeper into examining myself and the recommendation there. I recommend early on in the book to get a growth group to go through the book with. In the listen and learn section, I'm intentional about talking about history, American history. Again, I'm very clear that it's from the Black experience. So it's only a chapter of the book, but I start from 1619. I know there's controversy about the start of slavery, how it started, et cetera, but I just go with what's common and I do 1619 to present day. And then a big part of the book that I've gotten a lot of feedback on is in that listen and learn section. I have what I call the top 10 questions. And in the top 10 questions section, I address questions that I frequently get in addition to what can I do? And so I respond my lens. I respond to all of those questions. I give resources to support the response. And then I end with questions for you and your group to go deeper into that topic. And so that's the listen and learn piece. And then the final step is to be bold. I like to point out that it's not a 1, 2, 3, 4 process. It's it's a cyclical process and you start in different places. So I say for some people, myself, for example, my first step was being bold. I talk about this in a book that I was often quiet because there's a stereotype associated with Black women that we're angry Black women. And so I've often been quiet because I didn't want to be misassociated or misunderstood as an angry Black woman. So that caused me to be quiet and operate and maneuver in a different way. So writing this book for me was being bold. My first step was to be bold. And I think also the examine yourself and listen and learn piece, you, as you're listening and learning, you're gonna have to keep going back and examining yourself. As you're listening and learning, something might happen and you're gonna have to be bold. So it's not a 4-step process at all. So thanks so much for asking that question, Nancy.
But you see, you're not being authentic if you're manipulating your own self because it's something that's illusionary. That's why I can't think of anyone as any different than me if they've got 2 eyes and a mouth and a nose, like they're like, and I tend towards, naturally everybody is attracted to certain people of my same race or of a different race. Like there's some people that you're attracted to and others you're not. And that's not a discrimination either. That's just your natural inclination. And it might be wrong a lot. I liked the part about, that video that you showed of just different people interacting, in different ways with different minorities. But there's, once you've gone there, you can't go back.
Yeah.
If
preferences don't have to be wrong. You can, we're entitled to have preferences and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right?
But I mean, once you've gone to the point where you're assuming anyone is different really than you, fundamentally, in a kind of a racial way, I don't see how that's possible at all. But for the people that do, it's real to them, I guess. It just, it's so foreign. And then reverse racism is, just as bad. We had city council people, these 2 white guys, one was just terrible and the other one was a complete betrayer. And they won this seat. And then this one woman that was Jewish spoke up on their behalf and she got slammed for being racist, that they should be chosen above the Black person. I mean, the Black person that's on my city council is terrible, and I don't want to feel like I'm, being prejudiced because she's terrible. She just naturally is terrible,
And you recognize that it's not because of her race, right? So I think that's a part of the whole being aware of the biases. So, there's been discussion about, let's say there's some companies who are saying we want to increase our minority workforce by X percentage. And then there's discussions about, well, how's that fair? And it's like, well, unfortunately, people are feeling like you have to fix this in some way, and that's the solution that they're picking. But for me, I go back to the whole subconscious and conscious, the biases, and you bring those out. And it's one thing for you to say, I'm going to diversify the applicant pool, but it will always be that discussion of, well, is that fair if you feel like someone was a hire to fill a quota? But I think too, like you said, it's a matter of if someone does something good or bad and you associating that good or bad with because of the color of their skin. So that person was a really good committee member because they're a white man, or maybe not, it was the race, but just intrinsically who that person is, right? And so I think that it's all a discussion.
Blacks are intrinsically really, like in the race where they ran the race, there's absolutely no doubt that what's happened, like the Nazis, is unconscionable. But the Jews are doing the same things to the Palestinians that was done to them by the Nazis. So it's, it's it's, I mean, we need reparations. We need massive reparations, you know, because these things that are unconscionably bad and unjust, and most of which can never be repaired because there were deaths, there were lynchings, there were just horrific stuff. That stuff, you can't put a price on it.
Well, you make a good point, and I talk about this in my book, and I didn't go there to here tonight, you know, because some might say it's cliche. The solution, listen, this is all matters of the heart. And, you know, that really is what it comes down to. So when I say about that introspection and you looking deep within, to me, I'll tell you transparently, when I wrote my book, I had, I got down to 2 publishers, and one publisher said, well, you have scripture in your book. You might want to take the scripture out. You're going to close off your, listen, I hadn't even identified a target market per se, because if you ask me who my target market is, I would say anybody with a heart. But this person was like, but if you're trying to get into corporations and into certain settings, you're not going to do that because you have scripture in your book. So your book's not going to be selected if they feel that it's a Christian book. And I said, you know, I can budge on the title. I want to be bold, but I can budge on the title. I'm not stuck to a cover, picture, color. But I'm like, I won't budge on that, because that will be not me being authentic to who I am. I tell my story throughout the whole book. And I said, and when we're talking about the very sense of discrimination or diversity or racism or reconciliation in any way, just like I can sit here and tell you I'm a Black woman, I am a Christian, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm from Louisiana, I have certain degrees, does not mean that I'm saying to you, because I'm a woman, I don't respect men. Because I'm Black means I don't respect other races. Because I am from Louisiana, I don't respect Minnesotans. So why is it that all of a sudden, the fact that I'm a Christian means that I don't respect other faiths, or the decision to have no faith, right? And so I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna budge on that. So it's been good to see that I have had just the opposite. I have had corporate and law firms and academic settings embrace the book and understand that, to point to your point, Lynn, is to me is because it all comes down to the heart. And I said, what difference would it make if you asked me, what are my core values as a person? And I told you, I try to, in my life, display love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control in all things that I do. If you're not a Christian, you might think, well, that's great. You know, love, joy, peace. I try to love everyone. But if you're a Christian, you know that that's a scripture. So I said, would it make a difference if I just take the scripture off, but just keep the scripture? You know, if I just keep the message of love, you know.
Words without the scripture. Is that what you were saying?
So I'm sorry.
Like reword the scripture.
Yeah, reword the scripture and not cite the scripture. Would that make a difference? And the response was yes. And I was like, yeah, well, I don't want to do that. I hope that everyone will respect me and all my differences.
It's not like you're proselytizing. You're just, you know.
I share how I examined myself, and that happened to be a part of it, right? Yeah. You know, so I've appreciated, I've had people give me feedback on the book. I had one person who told me, I was in a meeting and someone said, a white man said, he said, it's just exhausting because Christianity is the majority in America, and being a minority in that sense is exhausting. And I said, well, I'm a minority in America. I know what you mean. And then someone spoke up and said, well, I actually already read her book and I'm an atheist. And that person said, and I, even though I'm an atheist, said, I still examine myself and I still have a heart and I still love, even though I'm an atheist. So I thought that was interesting to hear. And that just confirmed for me that we all have a heart. And like you said, we, instead of focusing on the differences, we should focus on the things that we have in common. And we all have hearts for the same function and purpose.
I would like to add a friendly footnote to something that you said, Lynn. It is the Zionists that are persecuting the Palestinians, not the Jews.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. It's the Haredis and the Kahanis, the right wing extremists that are driving the policy and have tied in to the Project for the New American Century and the whole corporate domination thing.
Yeah.
So it's a huge,
Yeah.
it's a fundamental issue of the world, in my opinion. If we solved Israel, Palestine, all of this would be a piece of cake, everything else. But that's really got to be done.
I know we're reaching our end. I wanted to take the opportunity to ask one last question to you, LaToya, if I may. If you could, and I know that I'm catching you by surprise, but would you have one or two ideas of what we as persons or organizations, because everybody that is here, they are just concerned citizens, or some of us are part of organizations, nonprofit organizations that are concerned with certain matters, topics. What could we, in your opinion, do? And I do, unfortunately, I do agree with you that it's hard, that is the prejudice and war between races, and that racism is going to end in our generation or our kids' generation. That's hardly, but we need to try to fight the issue. And personally, I believe in education. I think that's the best, and one of the reasons we are here, and we try to have those conversations in the CGS Minnesota, is because we do believe that the conversation does feed the brain and the soul and the heart. So if you could say one or two things that us as persons or institutions could do to try help to heal and fix, and I probably fix is not the best word, but what should we do? What can I do to end? Because I'm Latin American. It's not that easy to, but I know that there are other Latin Americans that have even worse problems. I'm an educated woman, so that helps. But what do we do to help the Black community, the Asians, that they are suffering so much with racism, not only here in Brazil, that has been an awful situation as well.
My response to that is we have to keep educating ourselves and those around us. We have to understand that this is not a sprint, but it's a marathon. And I often say to people, sometimes you may not see the cliche statement. I say, you just keep spreading seeds of hope, and you spread the seeds of hope. Doesn't mean you're going to see the tree grow or the plant grow, but you just never know. Something you said, something you did, that you planted in someone may not come to fruition in your presence, right? So I know that may sound like it's just too simplistic, but really that's all we can do. We can just continue to educate ourselves and those around us. I try to not let discussions and topics come into the play that can steer us into another direction, right? And so we're talking about the positive things that we can do. And someone will say, well, what about Black Lives Matter as a terrorist organization? Or, well, what about the political divide, the polarization? And for me, I don't control those things. I don't control politics. I don't control any of the things that are negative, but what I do control is the positive messages that I can continue to put out. And that's me encouraging people to continue to dig deep into yourself and recognizing what we have in common as opposed to the differences.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So much. And I want to apologize to you for mispronouncing your name earlier. I know, trust me, I know the feeling. I've been called a lot of different names, but I was like, her name is not Kathy. So I apologize to you for that.
No, that's something that really doesn't bother me, and actually, I really don't mind really.
Okay.
So before I leave you to give your last considerations, on behalf of the CGS Minnesota Board of Directors, I want to thank you, all of you, for attending. Please do keep with us. I know that some of you have been before. Thank you for returning. Some of you are new. Please keep coming. I also want, on behalf of CGS Minnesota, to thank our co-sponsor, Global Minnesota. I also want to do a little merchandise announcement. Our next event is the third Thursday Global Films Discussion. We'll have the documentary, The Wall, Raw Stories from 2018 Minneapolis Homeless Camp. This event is going to take place on Wednesday, July 15, from 7 p.m. Central Time here at Zoom. Please go to our website, Global Solutions Minnesota, or better saying, globalsolutionsmn.org. And you are going to find the place for you to register. Our guest speakers will be Brandon Furdick. He is the filmmaker and producer of the documentary, and he is the founder and president of the Periphery Foundation. And Noya Woodrich, she is the deputy commissioner of Minneapolis Health Department. So thank you, LaToya, so very much. We learned so much from you. Every time that I watch you, I'm in awe with everything that you say, and you exile love and passion. And I'm humbled by your smartness, your willingfulness to share with us, and very importantly, to be with us here today. With that, I would like to leave you with your last words. You close the.
Thank you so much for the kind words. Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you all tonight. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to be open, honest, and interactive with me tonight. I wish you all the very best afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Kat, is that going to be under CGS? Will I get an email? The homeless thing.
Thank you.
Citizens for Global Solutions, CGS. It'll come out to me on my email.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because I didn't get the exact place to go, but I put it 15th of July.
Everybody that is here tonight will receive a thank you note, and you receive that information that I just gave. So I know that you receive, Lynn.
Yay, thank you so much.
Just to be clear, we watch the film on our own first, and then we come together to discuss it.
Oh, so they'll send the film.
So there's a link so that you can watch it, and it's on YouTube, right, Katja?
Yes.
So I think we're able to watch it at no charge, and then we discuss it together.
Great. Thanks.
You get all the information over your email. Thank you so very much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you, LaToya. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
You too.